Okay. All right. Hi, everybody. I hope everybody is doing well today. I am going to be here having the session with Teodora Pasca, and I'm very excited. How are you doing today, Teodora?
I'm good. Thank you for the invitation.
All right. So I just wanted to quickly introduce myself before we go ahead with this session today. So my name is Sasha, and I'm studying at the University of Toronto. I'm an English major, and I have career aspirations of becoming a lawyer myself. And I'm sure others as well who have joined us and who will be joining in the future do too. So with further ado, I'd like for you to introduce yourself.
Okay, my name is Teodora Pasca. I'm a criminal defense lawyer. I practice in Toronto. I work at a firm called Daniel Brown Law. We do everything under the sun in terms of criminal offenses. We also do criminal trials and appeals. And I really like my job, and I'm looking forward to telling you about it.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead with a few background questions, just general questions, so we can have everybody familiar about who you are and how you came to become a lawyer. So I just wanted to start off with what program and courses did you study in your undergraduate program and at which university?
So I went to the University of Toronto. I did a double major in criminology and ethics, society, and law.
That's really fun. That's really fun. So what kind of courses did you take specifically that inspired you to kind of go into that program?
Um, Criminology was really about how the criminal justice system works and from all sides of it. So like there were legal courses, which made me think about becoming a lawyer in the sense that I could sort of learn the law and apply it in the ways that I've been doing in my classes. There were also courses that were focused more on sociology and how the prison system works, how policing works. And I was really interested in those courses as well, because I feel like it provided me with some context. I didn't really have any personal experiences within the justice system at all before I started this job, and before I even began my criminology studies, certainly no background at all. And coming from a pretty privileged position, I got to learn more about the system and how it operates. And so that was very helpful for me in terms of thinking about what I want to do with my life and the kinds of people that I wanted to help. And then in terms of my other major, ethics, society, and law is in the title, but it wasn't really law focused. I guess there were a couple legal courses that were very interesting, but it was mostly ethics and philosophy focused. So it was, most of my classes were kind of asking big questions like how to be a good person, what to value in life, things like that. And criminal defense is a very morals driven practice in my experience. A lot of criminal defense lawyers are very passionate about what they do, and they believe that people deserve a good defense even if they've done bad things. And so those two majors kind of really meshed well together for me when I was making this decision to pursue law.
And so what really inspired you to go into that program and to even think about law school in the future? Because I'm seeing that you did your undergrad and you also did your master's and then you went into law, or did you do your master's afterwards?
So I actually did my master's at the same time as my law degree. The University of Toronto has, along with a bunch of other law schools, I went to U of T for all three degrees. So I'm a big U of T stan, I guess. But the U of T Law School has combined programs in which you can do your law degree, but you can also do another degree at the same time. And sometimes those programs require extra time and money, and sometimes they don't. So I did a one-year master's spread out over 2 years. Taking master's courses and law courses, and I managed to get 2 degrees just for the cost of a law degree, which was wonderful. I was very busy, but it was great. And so just to loop back to your first question of how I kind of decided to get into this area, I think I was really interested in criminal justice in undergrad and wanted the type of job where I could really make a difference for people. And there's so many different options for that if you're interested in criminal justice. I had colleagues who went on to become parole officers and correctional services workers or social workers, or went on to work in academia. But for me, I thought that law was the best fit because I really like working with rules. I really like advocating and advocating for people, especially. I like sticking up for people. And being a lawyer is a really good chance to put all that together, figure out what rules apply, figure out who the person that you're representing is and how they operate within those rules, and then see, what they're alleged to have done and figure out whether they're being treated fairly and make a pitch for something fairer. So now that I'm in my job, I think that I made exactly the right choice. And it definitely, I can see the clear line between some of the things that I started learning even in my first year in undergrad and law school and my master's all the way to here.
Thank you. And I'm just wondering, did you do any extracurriculars at all while you were in your undergrad that kind of, made you gain a little bit more insight and experience into this career path?
Yeah, one of the things I did was undergrad mooting, which has now become much more popular than it was even when I was in undergrad, but even back then it was quite popular. For those who don't know what mooting is, it's essentially like mock appeal court. It's very nerdy and fun. You become like a team with one other person, and you become a team of lawyers basically, and you're appealing usually a Supreme Court of Canada case to a fake court. And mooting is all about preparing for competitions hosted at different universities, in which you have to moot usually both sides of the same case. Often they would be criminal cases, so you would prepare submissions for both the Crown side and for the defendant side at the appeal level. And there would be really interesting issues. Like I worked on moots about whether inmates should have the right to vote if they're in federal institutions, whether the police can search your cell phone incident to your arrest, or whether they have to get a warrant for that search, all sorts of different interesting criminal problems. And I felt like that experience, both like in terms of the background of criminal law and also the experience of getting up on my feet and working with someone else to put together a case, really was formative and very valuable for me, in terms of both just like my own personal interest in the area, but also I think it looked really good on my resume. And I suspect that it gave me a lot of really good experience when I went on later to apply for jobs and to apply for law school.
Did you have a favorite case at all that you did while you were doing moot? Do you remember any at all that kind of
Yeah.
inspired you? Like, hey, I really like this.
Yeah, I think my favorite would have to be the Queen and Jordan. I think it was in my third year of undergrad. This case is about the right to a trial within a reasonable time under Section 11B of the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. And this case was all about this man who was charged with what was supposed to be pretty straightforward drug charges, if I remember correctly, but the case took like almost 50 months to get to trial. And it was pretty appalling. And like the criminal justice system, you will learn if you get into this area, is extremely backlogged to this day. Cases take a really long time to get through the system. And often people don't appreciate that if you're charged with something, even if you didn't do it, or even if you did do it, it might take years and years for you to get some sort of outcome in your case. And living with that hanging over your head can be really, really difficult and stressful for you and your family members and everyone else around you. And Jordan was a case where the Supreme Court of Canada basically said, enough is enough. Things aren't moving fast enough. We're going to create a new framework for how we assess whether a case has taken too long. And they created all these different rules, which I won't get into. But I really enjoyed that case because it was really a debate about, everyone was on the same page that this backlog was a problem. Like it wasn't a case where the Crown and the defense were just kind of on opposite sides of the issue. Everyone knew what the problem was. But the majority of the dissent in that case were kind of arguing about how to best solve the problem. And now in my practice, I actually do Jordan motions all the time. Like we actually deal with these types of issues pretty regularly because a lot of cases are delayed. A lot of cases we consider whether our clients should be bringing constitutional challenges. The remedy for those challenges is a stay of proceedings, which means the case is done. So the stakes tend to be really high. And it's kind of a nice little bookend that like one of my favorite mooting cases is now something that I tend to encounter pretty regularly in my practice. And I'm sure other criminal defense lawyers would say the same.
Wow, that's crazy. Wow. And, I just wanted to know, while you were studying in your undergrad and even in your master's, did a professor at all stick out to you? And did they at all kind of, I guess, serve as some form of guide or mentor for you? How did they stick out to you?
I had one professor in my undergrad who ended up teaching at the law school as well. So I had him both in my undergrad and in my law school. And I really liked the way that this professor encouraged us to kind of interrogate issues and think outside the box. He was wonderful. He taught a theory, I believe like a theories of criminal justice class in my undergrad. And then in law school, I took criminal procedure with him. And a lot of students really like him for his teaching method, because he would often put students on the spot and really make them think about why they were saying certain things. And the issues that we discuss in his classes were often quite controversial, but we would always navigate them with, respect and common understanding. And I felt like that made for really good class discussion. And it also forced me to kind of think about, if I'm putting out my view on this and somebody expresses an opposing view, how am I going to defend what I think? Or am I going to change my mind? Like maybe somebody else convinced me that their view is right. So he really encourages the students to do that. And I thought it was really good.
Thank you. And, was there any way at all how your master's experience at U of T kind of differed from your undergrad at all? Was it kind of more like stress level, or was it more like how it challenged you, or was it always sort of challenging?
The master's was not too dissimilar from my undergrad. I mean, it was definitely higher level and more challenging, and the issues were more complicated. But because I did my master's also in criminology, also at the University of Toronto, there was actually quite a lot of continuity, which was really nice. It felt like some of the issues that I dealt with in my undergrad, we were kind of expanding upon in the master's. And I also had classmates that did not do the same undergrad. And so like they came from different perspectives as well. I know you didn't ask me this specifically, but I actually really enjoyed doing the master's at the same time as the law courses, because I felt that those were really different. Law school was all about like rules and learning the rules and applying the rules. Like law school, the first year of law school kind of tries to rewire your brain. And so nobody really, I don't know if this is fair, that nobody really cares what you think. I think people do, to be charitable to my professors. But the point of law school is like to learn how to think like a lawyer. And so you're not necessarily interrogating the rules and like thinking about why they're there, at least not at first. Like as you get more advanced, you can get there. But at the beginning, you're kind of just saying like, okay, these are the things that I have to follow, and how do I apply that to like this client or this situation? Whereas the master's was kind of like, I had classmates who were like, why is that the rule in the first place? Like, why do we make the law like that? Like, let's change it. And I thought that was really refreshing. And by the time the law school kind of caught up with that thinking, I was doing both at once. So that was really helpful for me. And it was helpful to have classmates who weren't lawyers. Like there were a couple of people in my classes who also had a legal background, but others came from totally different perspectives. And they had, they just had really refreshing takes on things that lawyers often take for granted, which I thought was very formative for my understanding of how the system works.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that input too. I should have asked you more about your other classmates too, since they come from different backgrounds. I would ask more questions about that, but I kind of want to get to the one question that I'm sure that people are dying to know. So I wanted to fast forward just a little bit and ask you. So now I know a lot of us are, planning to apply for law school very soon, and, it can be really stressful. So I was wondering, how was the LSAT and law school admission process like for you? And do you have any tips for studying or any kind of resources that you used?
Okay, so I'll start with the LSAT specifically. The LSAT was tough for me. It wasn't that the test itself was so difficult. It was the process that really wore me down. Like I found it very stressful. It's very high pressure. You have to do a lot of work to prepare. And the test environment itself is very stressful. Like I'm not sure what they're doing now with the pandemic, but pre-pandemic when I took the test, it was all in person. I had to come with my little Ziploc bag of items and like be security screened from head to toe just to make sure I wasn't cheating. Like it was pretty silly in my opinion. But it was just you have to learn how to function well under extreme pressure. And I felt like half of it was the actual substance of the test, like learning how to do the questions, but the other half was really just mindset and like making sure that you're doing your best. So the way that I prepared, honestly, I did a lot of practice questions and I did a lot of practice exams in timed conditions. So my advice to you would be like, learn the format of the test and then practice it as if you're doing the test at home, which is like honestly a miserable existence for a while. You have to tell your friends like, no, I can't go out. I have to sit here for 5 hours and do a practice test again, but it's worth it. Like it pays off because most people end up struggling not with the content of the questions, but how to do them in the little time that you have. So by the time I got to the test, like I was still kind of shaken up, but I knew what to do because my body had kind of gone through the motions at home. And so I think if you do that and practice in the way that you would do on the test a lot, you'll be in a better position to do well.
Right.
Yeah. In terms of the application process, I only applied to U of T and to Osgoode just because I wanted to stay in Toronto. I would say if you have a more open mind than I did at the time, I would apply widely. Like there's lots of really excellent law schools in Ontario and Canada in general, and you can't really go wrong. I would also say do your research about the schools that you want to go to and figure out the reason why you want to go there specifically, like not just for your applications that you can put in, you know, like I know all about your school, like here's the reasons why I'm drawn to you, but also for yourself so you can make a decision at the end of the day. Like I think it's really good to have options and also to really understand what to do with those options if they pan out in the way that you like.
And you said that kind of preparing yourself for the LSAT, you kind of put yourself in that zone by sort of putting yourself in that mindset. So for prep material, I'm assuming you use like active recall. Did you use previous test materials from the LSAT
I
and like
did.
cue cards maybe?
I don't think I used cue cards, but I definitely had previous practice tests and practice questions. I think I had a colleague who had a bunch of old LSAT books that she lent me, which was very nice. And then I just, yeah, like I had a bunch of tests in my computer and I just did them like as if I was doing the real test. You can use those tests just for like little practice problems, or you can actually drill them through the system eventually and like try to do them in timed conditions. So that's essentially what I did. And then I would score myself at the end and then try to figure out how I could do better next time.
And I'm just curious if you are comfortable with sharing, how was your GPA like when you were applying, and what LSAT score did you ended up going with when submitting your application?
I think I took the LSAT once and I got a 167, which I think was the median score for U of T at the time. And then my GPA, it's a 4.0 scale, right? I don't really quite remember. Yeah. So I think I was at like 3.95 or so, like somewhere in that range. I think I was in the higher range for GPA and more like kind of median LSAT for U of T, but then for other schools, like probably on the higher end. I will also say that like those scores matter a lot. And I'm sure that my success in like getting into law school depended heavily on those scores. Other things matter as well. Like your undergrads matter a lot. Like your undergrad extracurriculars matter a lot. The way that you phrase your personal statement and who you are matters a lot. And so I wouldn't discount those types of things in favor of just getting the best possible LSAT score or something like that. Like you have to speak to the law school administrators at each school to figure out exactly how they weigh each component. But I don't think that there's a school out there that just doesn't look at any of your resume or experience or you as a human being and just attributes your success to your score. Like it's just one piece of everything that you do.
Okay. And you said you did moot, and did you do anything else? Maybe did you do any maybe nonprofit work, or anything that also made you kind of stand out a little?
One thing I did that wasn't law related, but I did feel like really helped was I worked for the student newspaper at U of T. I worked for the Varsity for some time. And the reason why I felt like that helped was I ran the opinion section. And even though it like often had nothing to do with law, it was often like putting out an issue every week of the paper. It was a lot of work. You read a lot of writing by students, you do a lot of like editing, and you become a really good writer. So by the time that I got to the point of like putting together my personal statement and things like that, I felt like I had really good communication skills and I could really like write an opinion about
Mhm.
myself and why I'm good and why the law school should let me in. So that was very valuable. But also like it was a good opportunity to get in this zone of like offering constructive criticism or like having discussions about certain points. Like there were times at which like my writers and I would disagree about something, or like when I was
Mhm.
editing pieces where I'm like, I don't agree with this at all, but like they're entitled to their opinion and like I'm going to try to make it as strong as possible. So I was offering comments like, what about this point? What about that point? And then they would kind of engage in a dialogue with me. And that is like, you know, in the journalism realm, I think that's like the closest thing to law that there is. And I
Mhm.
found that it was very helpful.
Mhm. And was there maybe a piece that stood out to you at all that you were like, oh, I don't agree with this, but then I can see your point of view and then I can understand that and maybe side with that person? Anything that kind of stood out to you at all?
Mm, I remember I was the opinion editor around the time that like all the controversy with Jordan Peterson was happening.
Mhm.
And I certainly didn't really agree with anything that Jordan Peterson himself said. But we had some writers who were kind of like, look, I don't really agree with his substantive views either, but there was more controversy about like the protests on campus against his discourse and how to respond to his discourse properly and things like that. And there were a couple of pieces that came out from people who like, you know, maybe substantially I don't really agree that like this person should be given a platform, but they were kind of
Mhm.
engaging in intelligent conversation about, well, what should we do then? Like, how should we screen professors for what they're supposed to say? Should we do that at all? And like, to what degree? How is it appropriate for protesters to respond? Like, you know, I think there was one piece that, if I remember correctly, where he took like issue not with the substance, but just with the form of the protest and the fact that people had gotten kind of rowdy. And the writer
Mhm.
had just said, like, that is never the answer. Like, that was the entire pitch of the piece. And no
Mhm.
matter what the substance is of the views that you disagree with, like, violence is never the answer. And like, some people strongly disagree with that. Some people think, no, like, I think that I'm entitled to punch Nazis. Those people need criminal defense lawyers. So I'm going to drop my
Mhm.
details into the description for them. But like, you know, all's to say, like joking around and stuff, also say that these are difficult issues. And I found my experience in kind of like engaging with different viewpoints, regardless of like kind of where we ended up, to be very rewarding. And like that entire realm of like discourse, now it's
Mhm.
been many years, but it still kind of stuck with me as like a really interesting time to be an editor.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm also part of the varsity too, so I totally agree with what you're saying. So just a tip for you guys, definitely do writing on the side. So now I would ask you more questions about law school and your master's, but I feel like that we really covered quite a bit of it. However, I noticed that you had an internship placement with Innocence Canada. So I wanted to ask you how your placement was like with them and if you have any tips for students who are trying to score an internship.
Okay. So I worked with Innocence Canada in my third year of law school, I believe. It was set up so that students who wanted to do, it was called an externship, students who wanted to do an
Mhm.
externship program could apply through the school, and then they would sort of place you somewhere depending on where you were interested. And I was interested in Innocence Canada because I like feel very strongly about like remedying wrongful convictions, and their whole mission is to help people who feel that they've been wrongfully convicted go through the review process to have like, these are people who have exhausted all of their appeals, like they're kind of sitting in jail and they're like, I didn't do this, or I shouldn't have been convicted, or whatever the case may be. So they help those people. And I thought like, just the organization has a wonderful mission statement. The people there were really, really good and like just like thoughtful people and very thorough, like just going through every piece of evidence, every ground of appeal, like everything that ever happened in this person's case to figure out like where things went wrong and what kind of pitch we could make to the government to be like, hey, you should take a second look at this. I think this person actually is innocent. And it was really eye-opening and rewarding to work for them. I'm not sure if they specifically take undergrads, but I would say in general, if you're interested in sort of more nonprofit, like legal aid, community legal work like that, I don't think there's any harm in trying to like start early, like emailing and just voicing your interest. It may be that they don't have a place for undergrads and they just kind of prioritize law students. But if you get to law school and you have those types of opportunities, definitely take them. And then there might be organizations that do work with undergrads and they need volunteers, maybe not in a specifically like a legal capacity, but just to be there and help them with their work. So I think like cold emailing never hurt anyone. The worst that can happen is they say no, right? So you might as well try. And like I find in general that like expressing genuine interest in something always leads to a good thing.
And I find it interesting that that externship that you had really connects with your work today, because here I'm reading that your focus is to advocate for marginalized groups and for those specifically in the criminal court and those with wrongful convictions. So could you maybe explain a little bit more in depth on what that entails? And maybe if you can at all, if you can provide maybe one of your favorite cases or something that you dealt with that was, again, eye-opening, that, changed your perspective on something.
Okay. So in terms of my practice now, the firm that I work with, we mostly get clients who have never been in trouble before. And this is sort of the most traumatic thing that's ever happened to them. Like, imagine, your friend, your sister, your mom, like one day says, I've been charged with a criminal offense. I have no idea what to do. I'm in trouble and I could go to jail. Like, I don't know what's happening. Often our firm gets people like that who are in a lot of trouble. They're very worried about what's going to happen. And our mission statement is to kind of guide them through the process, because the criminal justice system can be very difficult to navigate. Even for people who have some familiarity, it can be very brutal and unfair sometimes, to be frank. Like, sometimes we have clients who are like, are you serious? Like, they're really doing this? Like, they're really asking for this? And it's difficult sometimes to understand the defendant's perspective, I guess, from the other side of things. Like, if you kind of look at the news, if you speak to people who are involved in law enforcement and stuff like that, they all have, I think, very valid viewpoints and concerns about like this, the community needs to be safe. I don't want people getting in trouble. Everyone deserves to kind of be secure. But also, like, crime is often caused by, not by people just being evil, but by social circumstances, or just people making mistakes. Like, think about the worst day that you ever had in your life and how you behaved on that day. Mm-hmm. And then think about how you'd want someone to treat you in response, right? Like, sometimes people have a really bad day and they act out and nothing happens to them. Sometimes that happens and then they end up arrested. So like, our job as criminal defense lawyers is to help people navigate that process and to try and secure the most fair outcome. Sometimes that fair outcome is, you're found not guilty after a trial. Sometimes that outcome is my client pleads guilty, but they're going to get a lenient sentence. Or sometimes it's, this doesn't even have to go there. Like, let's try to convince the prosecutor that what happened here is actually not that big of a deal, or that there's been a misunderstanding, or that the client can do something to kind of make up for it that kind of diverts everything out of the process and spares everyone the trauma of going through it. So yeah, that's kind of what it's all about. In terms of a case that I really like, I'm pretty junior, so I haven't had too much exposure to cases at my firm yet. I've just been practicing for maybe 5 or so months. But one really formative experience that I've had so far was in December. I was co-counsel on a jury trial at the Superior Court of Justice in Toronto. And the jury trial was just a really long time coming. Like, the case had been in the system for almost 5 years. And there were lots of preliminary motions, lots of issues. Like, the jury had to be selected, lots of issues came up. And me and my co-counsel, who was the partner in the firm, the lead lawyer working on this case, we worked so hard to just give this guy a fair trial. Like, it was, sometimes we felt like, the system was kind of stacked against him. And we did our best to ensure that that didn't happen. And the feeling of the jury at the end of the day saying this person is not guilty was so rewarding and so overwhelming. Like, it was very emotional for everyone involved. And it was just like such a relief. And I jumped on this case like quite late in the game. So I can only imagine how much of a relief it was for, them and their family. And yeah, it was just there moments like that. I think like criminal defense lawyers live for, right? Where like all your hard work is just kind of validated and you know that you've made a difference in somebody's life.
Thank you. Um, and I'm seeing here again, since you probably already mentioned this right now. So prior to joining Daniel Brown Law, you served as a law clerk to judges of the Ontario Superior Court of Justice, assisting with a number of complex trials, assuming these being one of them. So could you maybe explain more in depth about this experience and what you enjoyed most, as well as your experience working for the United Nations in the Netherlands? I think that's really cool. So
Sure. So I'll start with the UN experience because it came first. I worked at the UN when I was in first year law school. There's a wonderful legal clinic at the U of T Faculty of Law called the International Human Rights Program. They do a lot of really meaningful like advocacy from home, but another thing that they do is they send students on fellowships. So they gave me a grant to do this internship over the summer, and it was a great experience. I worked at a tribunal. There used to be two tribunals for the genocides in Rwanda and Yugoslavia that like prosecuted those cases separately. As their work started to wrap up, they kind of merged into one tribunal, and now it's called the International Residual Mechanism for Criminal Tribunals, and they basically deal with all the work that's left. So like any appeals, retrial proceedings, anything like that, like custody orders after all these cases have been prosecuted, and that's where I worked. And I like it was just a very interesting lens to take criminal law, or through which to look at criminal law, because I was so used to kind of Canada and our system, but then I had colleagues from all over the world and also legal traditions from all over the world influencing this process. I was also quite used to, Canada and like the Charter of Rights and Freedoms and how our prosecution system usually works. This is a statutory tribunal by the UN, right? Like it's like set up for a specific mandate. There's no constitution really. Like the constitution kind of is the document that creates the court, and in the same breath kind of says like what the accused rights are, what the prosecution's rights are and stuff like that. Like policing is much more complicated at the international level, I'm sure you can imagine, like in terms of people skipping borders and stuff like that. So everything was just kind of magnified, and it was really interesting to think about how like problems that I had seen before are going to be dealt with in like the international scale. Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, no. I just wanted to ask more a little bit about, but no, continue, please continue.
Go ahead. I was going to move on to the other experience, so ask your follow-up.
Oh, no, and I just kind of wanted to ask you, how did that make you feel with the difference in when you were here in Canada and over there as well? Because these are much heavier cases, maybe, in my own opinion, because it is international, way more complex. So did you have a course on that while you were in law school about, sort of preparing you before going over there?
I didn't take any classes specifically that prepared me. I guess I took criminal law, but it was still domestic criminal law because it was pretty early. I took a seminar in my third year about international criminal law, and that kind of all put it in context, but it was after I finished the job already. Definitely there are more complex cases. Like sometimes you're dealing with cases that have like thousands of victims, so many exhibits, like so many pictures, and also just cases that, if we're going to talk about delay, like cases that are being prosecuted like after the war is over, like long after the war is over, right? So because that's just kind of how it goes in international conflict zones, you don't get resolution until the very end. So sometimes you would have cases where like the actual alleged crime happened like 20 years ago. And there's all these interesting questions about like, well, how do you get the evidence in to prove that case, right? On the one hand, it seems like it would seem unfair, for example, to like the victims and to the Crown, or to the prosecution in this case, to say, well, the evidence isn't recent enough, or you can't find the original document or whatever. Like sometimes the original document was blown up in the invasion. Like there's just no original document. So what are you supposed to do? So sometimes there are evidentiary shortcuts that can help you. But on the other hand, like let's say you have an innocent person accused of a crime in that system, and suddenly they're relying on hearsay to convict him. Or sometimes they don't like, that they're like, oh, we can't find the victim, but we know he died. So, and you did it. Like it creates really difficult questions for how we prove things, I think, in that system. And like, I definitely felt like the Canadian system prepared me for some of those questions, but in other cases, like I didn't really know what to do because it's just a totally different ballpark.
And I wanted to just go a little bit more forward, because it is now 6:17, and I know that I probably have until 6:40 until those who join the session start to ask you questions personally themselves. So I kind of wanted to ask, some more milder questions. So I wanted to ask you, what is a common misconception about lawyers that you hear the most?
Oh, there's so many. Let me think. I think there's a specific like picture of women lawyers in movies and TV as like miserable human beings who are sad and just like don't have any fun. Like you know what I'm talking about, right? Where it's just like
Mhm,
sometimes like if there's like a woman lawyer, unless it's a show about lawyers, it might be a little bit
mhm.
better. But like otherwise, it's like, oh, she's a lawyer. She probably like has no life, like always working, like no
Yeah.
boyfriend, no husband. Like she probably has like you know, some relative or some friend or something that has like a whole family and they're so happy and she's
Mhm,
just sad and like always ordering takeout and just like not doing very well. So anyways, it's a story I guess about like women can't have it all or whatever the saying is, like
mhm,
women just like have no life if they go into law. I think that's not true at all. Like first of
mhm,
all, like lawyers do not have very good work-life balance, admittedly. Like we work really hard and it's hard to not do that when your clients' lives are in your
mhm,
hands. But I think the profession is slowly learning that if you work at like 150% all the time, you're just gonna like face plant one day and never get up. Like there has to be a time when you kind of take time for yourself,
mhm,
and recuperate,
mhm,
especially when you're dealing with like criminal law, which can be very
mhm,
emotionally difficult sometimes. Like it's
mhm,
important to take space for yourself. Um, when I started seeing mental health, not just as like a thing that I do for me just to be nice to myself, but also as a professional responsibility, I think I
mhm,
started doing a lot better with taking breaks and like making sure that I'm prioritizing myself as well. Because if your life is 100% work and you have
mhm,
nothing else going for you, the one time work doesn't go well, like you don't really
mhm.
have any support system, right? And that's not really a
Right.
good way to practice.
I know that this is also kind of on the side, but do you have any favorite law TV shows that you like or any podcasts?
Um, Law TV shows, I think my favorite one has to be The Good Wife. I think it's
Okay.
quite realistic and
Okay.
really interesting. Other than the fact that for some reason American TV lawyers, like one day they do a murder and then the next day they do a murder trial. And I'm like, what is your practice? Like, what exactly do you do? That doesn't happen in real life for sure, at least
Right.
not in Canada. But otherwise, I felt like the drama between the characters and like the tensions and her
Mhm,
difficulty kind of keeping up with her own family and her career, getting back into it. I thought that was all very like compelling, and I really liked
mhm.
that show.
How about How to Get Away with Murder?
I like that show as well. I don't think I watched past season one because there were just too. First of all, they never studied, which is not accurate. Like in law school,
Mhm.
everyone is just always studying, and these people are like committing murders. Like that's not real.
Mhm,
But I think the show became self-aware later, right? Because then they
mhm,
all realized like they were flunking out because were committing too many murders, and so they had to like,
mhm.
do some extra studying on the side. So I hear you. I appreciate it. I definitely like lived for the drama in the first season, but it just got a little bit out of hand for me, so I
Right.
had to
Yeah.
stop.
And podcast maybe?
I really like Serial as an intro to like true crime. I think most people have listened to it
Okay.
by now, but it's really good, and it also has like a happy ending in terms of the real life person behind it. So
Oh, okay. Cereal. How, like, in what spelling cereal? So,
oh, not like breakfast cereal, like Serial cereal.
got it.
It's about like basically a reporter dives into a case involving, I think, some high school students in which he thinks that
Mhm,
like the person who went down for the crime was wrongfully convicted. And I
mhm,
believe like, she does like a whole theory through the case. But I believe that the podcast and like the attention that it drew to this case was one factor in actually getting his case reviewed. And I don't think he's in custody anymore, which is really amazing, like the power of journalism. Fact
very
check
cool.
that for me just to make sure that I'm right, but I'm pretty sure that's what happened.
I'll send you an email.
Yeah.
Okay. And I just wanted to ask you two nice personal questions. Not super personal, depends on you how personal you like to get, but what advice would you give to your younger self prior to attending law school and becoming a lawyer?
Um, I would say in law school and in my profession in general, there's a lot of imposter syndrome, and not just imposter syndrome in the sense that you're feeling like I'm not good enough to be here. Like, it's also the fact that you're looking at everyone else and trying to model yourself off of what they're doing. Like, especially in law school, I experienced a lot of pressure to kind of be drawn to things that I wasn't really interested in. Like, there's a lot of pressure at U of T, for example, to get into like the corporate world and things like that. And I wasn't really interested in that kind of stuff at all. But half the time I was kind of thinking like, well, like, should I though? Like, should I explore this option? Like, should I pursue this thing? And my advice to myself would be just like, do what you want. Like, because you don't want to wake up 5 years from now looking back and be like, oh, like I picked the wrong thing just because somebody told me to. Like, you're going to know in your gut what you want to do.
Mhm.
And I would just pursue that to the best of your ability. Don't worry about what everyone else is doing.
Thank you. And what advice would you give to the next future generation of aspiring legal professionals?
Um, I would say come in with good like moral convictions and come in with like passion for doing the right thing. Like I have met a lot of lawyers who really have that sense that like I need to solve this problem or I need to help this person. And as a lawyer, you have a lot of power to do things. Like often as defense lawyers, we feel like we have no power. We have a lot more power than ordinary people just by knowing how the system works. And like even dispensing little bits of advice or little bits of guidance can be very powerful on your part as a future lawyer.
Mhm.
So I would say, use it for the right reasons and like
Mhm.
try your best to help as many people as you can.
Thank you. Um, and just a last question as well, because it just popped in my head. So we were talking a lot about international law and, dealing with various different countries as well and persecutions. So I wanted to know because in the beginning I asked, how should I pronounce your name? And you told me, oh, just call me Teodora instead. So does your background or your, different bicultural background, did that impact your decision on wanting to help those and to kind of, dabble a little bit in international law at all?
Um, I'm not sure that it had a specific link to
Mhm.
international law, but I definitely think like growing up as I'm like, I'm a white woman, but I'm also a
Mhm.
first gen immigrant. I wasn't born here and neither were my parents. I definitely
Mhm.
think growing up in that specific position kind of makes you think about the world differently and think about helping people differently. Like I
Mhm.
grew up kind of in a family where, you know, I was very privileged in many ways, but I also saw how my
Mhm.
parents were kind of like pushed to the side just for not speaking English as perfectly as everyone else or having an accent or like not
Mhm.
having, certain credentials that you could only have if you grew up in Canada, like things like
Mhm.
that. And I think that like sense of unfairness really bothered me even from when I was young. And unfairness follows like, the thread of you can follow like me just saying that's not fair from age 6 onwards all
Yeah.
the way up to this career, and it just has taken like different forms, right? Like I'm not an
Mhm.
immigration lawyer. I don't really work with people from my personal community just because I
Mhm.
haven't encountered very many of them yet.
Yep.
But like it's the same kind of vibe, right, where you're like this
Mhm.
just isn't right and I
Yeah.
want to do something to fix this. And there's a lot like, there's a lot of blatant racism in the criminal justice system. There's a lot of xenophobia, and like criminal
Mhm.
justice and immigration overlap quite a lot. And
Mhm.
so anytime that those threads come up, I do think about my roots too.
Okay. Amazing. Thank you so much. So I think for me, that is the end of my questions. So I will be passing it on to those who are in the Zoom session with us. So, if you guys aren't comfortable with, saying it out loud, you can always say it in the chat and I can ask it for you. Otherwise, I'm gonna pass it on to anybody here. So does anybody have any questions for Teodora at all? Just raise your hand. I don't think so. What? Oh, Fiona. Okay, I'm gonna mute myself. I'm gonna give Fiona the floor.
I just wanted to say hi and thank you for joining us and accepting my invitation.
Yeah, of course.
My only question really is just, you spoke a lot about doing your master's, doing law school, and then also like your work with the UN. How did you manage all of that? Because I can just imagine a lot of law students themselves talk about, oh my gosh, law school is already so hard. So how are you making time to do all of these things?
Yeah, Michael Scott, like somehow I manage. The answer is I don't know. I kind of just like I would sign up for things as they interested me, and I would do certain things because I was like, yeah, I gotta go for this, and then I would kind of just find a way to make it work. I've always thrived when I'm busier than not so busy. Sometimes it definitely gets overwhelming, and then I have to like physically take a step back and say like, you need to stop and do nothing for a few hours. But also like I found like it being genuinely interested in the stuff that I was doing, like motivated me a lot. Like I didn't sign up for these things just cause, right? Like, I guess like I'll go to the UN, like whatever. Like I wanted to go, right? Like I really wanted to do a master's. I wanted to do all these things. And so like, if you generally want to be there, like people kind of find a way. I also was very tired a lot of times, but like it worked out. And also you find that like sometimes working under pressure where you have limited time can actually be quite helpful. Like you're not sitting there working on one essay for 50 hours, like spinning your wheels trying to make it as good as possible. Like at a certain point, there would be times where I'm like, I don't have time to like think about this anymore. I'm just going to do what I think is best and leave it alone. And like maybe I won't get like 100% on like this one assignment, but I'll do lots of things quite well, right? As opposed to doing one thing perfectly. Some people are like the one thing perfect variety. I'm not really that type of person. There's nothing wrong with that either. Like some people really like to zero in on one thing, but I've always thrived, I think, doing multiple things at once.
Okay, thank you.
Is there anybody else that has any questions for Teodora? Ashmi?
I had a random question. What was your first day like as a lawyer? Like your first official day? Were you nervous? Was it what you expected? Was it more stressful than you thought, less stressful? Just your first official day as a lawyer.
My first day honestly was wonderful. Like I was called to the bar in June, and I actually still had like my clerking job during that period. And so like the very next day when I was officially a lawyer and still had my clerking job, like it kind of felt the same. Like the call to the bar was wonderful, but after that it was the same. My first day at my current firm though was great. Like I lucked out in that I found a firm that I really connect with everyone who works there, and we all kind of share the same values and get along really well. And I felt like they kind of just welcomed me really effectively. Like I didn't feel overwhelmed up front, and like they really just helped kind of ease me into it. That being said, like as a young lawyer, as like a junior lawyer, very often I feel overwhelmed. Like it just, there's so much to know and there's so many things that you haven't done yet. But I figured out like pretty quickly over the past few months, like the first time you do something, it's probably going to be a bit of a disaster, at least internally, if not externally. Like, maybe you won't cause a lot of damage to others, but like inside you'll be like, oh my God, I'm not doing this right. But then the next time you do that thing, you'll know how to do it because you've already kind of been through that process once before. So I think like, as long as you're in a good workplace environment in which people are supportive of you and making sure that you thrive and that you're able to make mistakes with like minimal consequence to others, and also like, learning from them as opposed to punishing you for them. I think that that's like the key, right? So yeah, long story short, my first day was great.
Thank you.
I think Stephania has a question as well, so I'm going to pass it on to her.
Thank you. Hi. Yes. Thank you for joining us today and giving me so much insight and stuff like that. I really appreciated hearing everything you had to say. I had a question when you were talking about kind of when you were doing so much and you're so tired and there's days where you're exhausted and things like that. Where do you draw your motivation from to keep going and to keep doing all these things and trying all these activities and stuff when you're really just tired?
It helps a lot when other people are relying on you. right? Like it's one thing to say, like, you know, if I write this paper and I don't do a very good job, I'll just get a bad mark. But like, who cares? Like, that's just me, right? Now that you're a lawyer, like actually people do care quite a lot. Like your clients really trust you to do a good job. That doesn't mean that you have to be perfect all the time, or doesn't mean you can't take time for yourself, but like, you know, you're trying to help someone through this process. You have a responsibility to them. And that's very motivating for me. Like it really wakes me up to the reality that like you have to work hard and you have to do your best to make sure that this person is getting the best possible defense, and also to make sure that you're not letting your team down, right? Because other lawyers are also counting on you and your work. And thinking about it that way, plus the idea that like, well, they're counting on you because they believe in you. Like, even if you don't believe in yourself, sometimes other people counting on you actually is enough to get you up and try again.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's a really interesting perspective. And when you're saying that, it makes me think of the times I felt really motivated. And you're right. It's moments where people are counting on you and believe that you can do it and things like that. So thank you.
Yeah.
All right. I'm assuming that is probably all the questions that we have for today. So I would honestly, again, like to repeat what Stephania said too. Thank you so much for joining. You know, we really appreciate those who, you know, make the time in your, you know, in their busy schedule, such as yourself. Thank you. We really appreciate it. I hope, you know, this gives all of us some, you know, new form of perspective and insight and some more courage to kind of go ahead and pursue our dreams. So yeah, that is all. So I think if that's everything, I'm just going to stop the recording in 3, 2, 1. Okay.